There is a lie you've been told which continues to be repeated. There is no such thing as too much debt as long as it can be serviced. The reason this is a lie is not because large sums of debt are impossible to service. It's that a fairly large percentage of people generally can't pay their bills. But it hurts to say that, so we just sweep that data under the rug. Somehow that makes everything okay. Or does it? You came here for the truth, so let me unveil that for you. Today we are going to talk about an extremely important topic, and that is Americans and Canadians' massive unpayable debt. And this is what I want to discuss because it hits home. I know that there are many people around that have taken mortgages that are $1 million or more. And that's in Toronto. I know the same for Vancouver. And I'm sure that problem exists in other cities around the United States. Same goes for other places around the world, whether it's in Australia, New Zealand, London maybe, other places too. And so we're being told a lie, that this is never going to be a problem as long as it can be serviced. But I'd like to project something to you, and you can give me your thoughts on this. Very quickly before I get into the charts and the articles. Think about this for a second, where you have an individual, they go to school, perhaps, they come out of school, they're in their mid to late 20s. This time they get an entry-level position if they're lucky enough to get a job. They finally make it out into the workforce. They're earning a little bit of income. If they can afford to then move out, that happens to be in their early to mid 30s. If everything works out okay, sometimes individuals can do it before that, depending on the city they live in. But I'm talking about the major metropolis areas, expensive homes, and so on. Okay, so they've taken on debt. And during that time, they had the student debt, maybe they had credit card debt, but now they finally get into the mortgage. Now, this mortgage is going to be a 25-year, it's going to be a 30-year mortgage. So imagine that. If an individual thinks about it, it's going to be in their 50s, maybe their 60s, before they pay off the debt. This is not an issue according to the financial advisors. This is not an issue according to the media. And in general, individuals who are heavily invested will also say the same thing. It's not an issue. But I would like to differ, definitely, and that's usually what I do. Somebody, this entire time, throughout their entire post-school, their whole career, up until the time when they're in their 50s and beyond, are paying off some debt. For what? For what purpose are they paying off this debt? It is unbelievably massive. In the meantime, they accumulate more credit card debt, personal line of credits, all sorts of home equity line of credits and things. And the objective for a lot of people is basically to never pay it back. But it accumulates more and more and more because of the debt compounding factor. That interest that they have, whether it's a credit card at 18%, whether it's a mortgage at 4 or 5%, doesn't matter. It adds up. The longer you take to pay it off, the longer it's going to take to pay off because the debt adds up on top of it. And this is a problem. And we can see that statistically, but just think about it in the most simplest form. Again, before I get into the charts and the articles for today, and that is, what does the average person or household earn versus what does a home cost? What does a car cost? What does that person do with their disposable income? I want to know all those factors, and then does it make sense? Does it make sense for an individual or a couple earning, let's say, $100,000 a year, which is high, to have $1 million in mortgage? If they earn $100,000 a year, it's not going to take 10 years to pay off that million. It's going to take a lot longer than that, because that $100,000, by the time you take off taxes, let's just say $70,000 to make it fair, you're left with $70,000. Now you got debt. You're going to pay off your debt, this, and this. You're going to pay off your food. You're going to pay off your electricity, utilities, and so on. And you're probably not left with that much, but you're able to pay off your monthly payment on the mortgage. So things get paid off. You can service the debt. But is that truly something that makes a lot of sense? You're going to carry something with you for 30 years, 25 years, 30 years, for this period of time. For what purpose? That's what I need to know, and it's just unbelievable. The banks have created a product, they call it a mortgage, so that people can afford ever increasing and ever expanding home prices. That's why this exists. It's not because it's worth any more. And as Grant Cardone says, there's the fallacy about they're not making any more land. If you ever fly over in a plane, look down, there's mostly land. That's most of what the areas are. Of course, maybe you don't want to live in the middle of nowhere, but it's really just the cities where you see the population, where you see the homes, where you see all that. Most of the rest of the area is just barren land. There's nothing going on. It's just grass and fields and roaming animals and things. The banks have created a product and we buy it. Okay, I've been taking way too long on that, but I hope I really set up the rest of this video. As U.S. household debt rises and wages stagnate, millions of Americans are tapping into home equity to keep up with day-to-day expenses. This is incredible. This is truly what I've been talking about every single time I do a video about real estate, but also about debt. And this really puts it all together, and I'm so glad I ran into this report. It's out of Bloomberg, and it's something that I've told you countless times. I know that if you are a subscriber to the channel, you've heard me harp on about this. Now I finally have some numbers to show you. 24 million homeowners believe borrowing against home equity is an acceptable way, I totally disagree with that, to cover regular bills according to Bankrate. All right, I'll show you that in a second. Cash-strapped millennials, low earners, and the less educated were the most likely to think home equity offered an appropriate solution to ordinary bills. Oh yeah, don't worry about it. I'll just use the equity as it's building up to pay off my bills. How ridiculous. And if you're telling me for a second, if you tell me for a second that this is acceptable, we're on two different planets. Regular household bills should be funded by a regular household income, not home equity. I completely agree with that. Wage growth has been elusive, but rising household expenses have not, and now home equity is being seen as a lifeline for those who are strapped with money with little wiggle room. How is this the Money GPS being quoted right here? Because I'm pretty sure I've said that about 12,000 times. It gets into some further details in that report out of Bankrate. This is the website right here. I need to touch on a couple points. Non-housing debt hit $3.86 trillion in the second quarter of 2018. That's a 4% increase over the second quarter of last year. So here we have non-housing debt increasing, and it's going to continue to do so. I don't disagree with that. With the sorry state of emergency savings and increasing levels of consumer debt in rising interest rate environment, it's a matter of when, not if, more homeowners turn to home equity to fund home improvements and repairs or consolidate debt. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that there's anything wrong with this. Do whatever you want with your money. I do not care. Please go ahead. But if you're tapping into that equity and suddenly we see home prices fall, you're going to be underwater, and it's going to be a very big problem. This seems to be okay for everybody. Everybody's doing it. It's the cool thing to do. Why not? You got all that equity there. This is the interesting thing about people that buy a home and then take the equity from it. Why not just rent a home? If that's your point in taking the equity out because you need the money, why are you buying a home? It's okay to rent a home. There's nothing wrong with that. I would rather put my money into an asset that pays me every month, and then that would be able to pay for my rent. Doesn't that make a lot more sense? What do you need the money for? If you buy a, let's say, real estate investment property, you're going to be able to write off all the expenses on that home should you need to do repairs, should you need to make house improvements. You're going to be able to do that because it becomes a business and the upkeep, the depreciation on the home, and so on. But you can't do it in the same way you can do that on your own home. There are different laws, different places around the world, and all different strategies, of course. But go with me for a second here, okay? So we're looking at the low-income households. Those earning less than $30,000 a year were twice as likely to view home equity as a viable way to keep up with their household bills as those earning $50,000 to $75,000. And when compared with the highest earning households, lower wage earners were more than 3 times as likely to consider tapping into their home equity. Okay, obviously, this is pretty obvious. I don't need to get into that anymore. We asked homeowners, what's the best reason to borrow against home equity? The number one by far reason was home improvements or repairs. And I understand, but why are you improving your home if you don't have the money? That's what I want to know. Why are you doing so? I really think that people have made a big mistake about, this whole thing. Like, I need to own a home. If you can't afford it, it's okay. Just rent. And there's nothing wrong with that, okay? Debt consolidation. I told you this before, why the bankruptcy rate is going down, and now we have yet more details. Although I did bring you some before, people are able to do this, and maybe that's fine. I don't have a problem with somebody that racked up credit card bills. They use their home equity to pay off the credit card. That's better because, of course, the interest rate is very high on the credit cards. It's better to use this. But is that really a good thing to do in the first place, racking up the credit card debt? No, of course not. All right? And of course, tuition and other education expenses is on there as well. And there are some other things here. I think it's important to look at Canada as well, because it's not just the US. We see that going on. This is the actual StatsCan website that shows you it all. It's a bunch of, it's a mess looking at this, but they've showed some statistics here out of Bloomberg. Canadians are using a bigger chunk of their paychecks to meet debt obligations. The household debt service ratio, it's a measure of the share of income that goes toward paying interest and principal on a mortgage, credit card debt, and other types of debt, reached 14% in the second quarter, the highest level since the end of 2008. We're still not there yet. There's no doubt about that, where we were before, but I don't really know how they've come to these numbers. That's all they are, okay? 14.2% in the second quarter of 2018. Going back 10 years ago, it was this bad. We've got an issue here simply because people are unable to service their debt. I don't care if it's 14.2%. I don't care if it's 15%. I don't care if it's anything. Doesn't matter. People are taking on way too much debt, and it's impossible to pay back. They will never pay it back because there's always a reason to take out more equity from their home, and they can continue that further and further and further. It's a very big mistake that they're making. Last but not least, more older Americans are, quote, unretiring. I don't have a problem with people working into their 70s, into their 80s, into their 90s. There's nothing wrong with that. I do have a problem, however, with somebody who retired at 65, 2 years later, a bad thing happened, they needed to go back to work, okay? And that's never good. I hear this all the time. I know there are so many people who say, I'm going to work until the very, very end. Unfortunately, today, more than ever before, there are a lot of individuals who physically are unable to, and, things happen, right? Things happen. Unexpected things happen. I believe the statistic is something like 30% plus people will run into life-changing type event that will affect them negatively. All right, health impact or so on, that's going to change everything for them. And that's a big thing. I think that was a United States statistic, but it applies to most other nations as well, that something's going to happen at some point. Maybe it's to yourself, maybe it's to a family member, and the average person's not prepared. They're planned on this. Okay, I have this many years approximately left to live. I'm going to get a pension check. I'm going to get my Social Security. I'm going to get that money. Plus, I have this money in a savings account, which I can take out $500 a month now, and I'll be fine. I'll be able to save a little bit, a few $100s a month, and so I'll be able to live comfortably. And then suddenly you get sideswiped, everything changes, and that's life. That's what's going on here. But that's basically what this thing is talking about. I'm not going to give you all the statistics. It's talking about the US, Canada, and so on. But I'll end it there. I went on really too long. I need to know from you specifically, no matter where you live. I want to hear from people all over the world. Okay, this channel has people in every country of the world. You are represented here today. Most of the subscribers are from the US, but I got people from literally all over the world. I've gotten from Tasmania to Indonesia to literally every corner. And I want to say hello to all of you first of all, but I need your help. I want to know the debt situation that you see around you. Are people taking on way more than they can handle? I want to know. Just let me know where you are, what country you're in, and then the debt situation. Yes, I know people at work that are just $1 million mortgages, or I know so many people who have racked up credit card debt and so on. Please do that. You're going to help everybody around the world learn from this. So would really love to hear your comments. I will be replying to as many people as I possibly can. That's it for this video. If you found it informative, please give me a thumbs up. When you give me a thumbs up, you're supporting this channel. That's all you need to do. You can also comment. That helps me out as well. If you want the financial education you were not taught in schools, these 2 books have it all. Okay, you can get that at the link in the description below. And if you're more interested in the audiobook version, you can get that at themoneygps.com.